Hey folks, this video is about Games Workshop as a modeling company. And it's something that some players have been kind of annoyed about, that Games Workshop would seem to really emphasize their models and not their uh, rules and game systems. And I'm going to essentially argue on the behalf that it's perfectly legitimate for Games Workshop to do so, and there are practical reasons why they would certainly label themselves as a modeling company. And so this video discusses the idea that rules are free format in Age of Sigmar, GW's long-term attitude about the rules, and Games Workshop's long-standing history as a modeling company. And in general, as I said, people view the idea that Games Workshop shouldn't necessarily emphasize themselves with models. They should emphasize the game, that the game is the core of the company. And so that's something I'm going to talk about for a little while. And even though it's about models, I feel like I should talk about rules and why a company shouldn't necessarily purely focus on rules. So I'm not a games designer, or a rules designer. Let me just kind of have that right out there. But I would like to point out a few practical reasons. And one of the reasons why is that I don't think a rules alone can support a company. There are many factors, but strictly speaking, rules can never appeal to a broad demographic. Right? There are many reasons why someone starts gaming or why someone would choose Games Workshop. They're not exclusively rules, but rules can't capture every gamer, right? Some rules are very intensive, very detail oriented. Others are more fluffy, and it becomes more of a personal choice and something based upon personality in many ways. So what appeals to you might not necessarily appeal to me, and vice versa. And that means that the market cannot gravitate to solely one company or game system based upon a rule set alone. And that's good. That drives competition. Um, and I don't think there's a whole lot of legal security with regard to rules. I mean, I don't think you can necessarily copy directly a rule system, but you can make something very similar and draw players away from a particular company. There's really no barrier of entry. I mean, there are large differences between good rules and bad rules, but anyone in their basement can come up with a brilliant rule set. Um, the advantage of Games Workshop is that it can has a wide range of stores and a worldwide network from which it can produce product. But and rules always need to constantly undergo constant change and clarification. Um, and they cannot solely guarantee large volume sales. You need far more than just rules. So rules are just one component of a company. Now, I think it's a positive move for Games Workshop to produce the rules for Age of Sigmar for free. But let's face it, a corporation doesn't make choices that aren't designed or every choice a company makes is to cut costs or produce greater profit. So there's incentives for why they decided to produce the rules for free for this game. And it's not just because Games Workshop is really nice and generous, clearly. But in some ways, it's because society has reached a level of technology, right? Most people have iPads or a smartphone that they can use, like the Age of Sigmar app. Um, it's pretty easy to get the War Scrolls online and download them and things like that. But it also matches their competitors. Some of their competitors offer free rules, and that's something that they were not quite up to speed on. But it also reduces production costs. They don't need to make these expensive books, or you could also argue that the rules were previously free, to some extent, because in the starter box they came with a little mini rule book, and many people bought the box to get that. But I think most people had maybe one or two copies of that, and so that's really designed to be free. But it by just making them freely available as a PDF, they don't have to produce those little books. That cuts down their costs. But most importantly, um, I think we've all had experiences with rules being released online. Um, if you don't buy that big expensive book, then maybe your friend has it and you're going to share it. You might post it online. You can find anything that you want online. I guarantee you, if you want those missions out of the New Age of Sigmar books, they're pretty easy to get. So there's another reason why it's not a great idea to make really expensive rule books because people just aren't going to buy them, or not everyone's going to buy them. I think the way that Games Workshop went, where they have this narrative fluff book, was a great idea. So Games Workshop has always had a very relaxed attitude towards rules. Um, in It's really quite funny because there are huge issues with Army Comp and specific mechanics in Age of Sigmar that are very contentious, that have drummed up a lot of debate, and there's really no resolution, despite what the players really say. Um, Games Workshop has always attempted to attract themselves to the casual gamer. That's really always been their focus, not just in the last couple of years, but right from the beginning. And there was an article written by Jervis Johnson, entitled, produced in the early 2000s, and it was entitled "Points: Who Needs Them." Many of you have probably seen that article. It's gone around on the different forums. It's widely available. And to be honest, though, it's nothing new. I've been reading interviews and articles by Jervis Johnson since the first month I started in the hobby, and that's always been his consistent attitude towards for years. Um, and I think that Jervis is an important guy in Games Workshop. He's been there right from the early years, and he's one of the main game designers. He's produced a lot of their games, and he's also pivotal in determining Games Workshop's long-term strategy. That's his current position at the company. And in the standard Bearer column in White Dwarf that used to come out periodically, Jervis Johnson would sometimes give his opinion about, house rules, or again, very casual. It was all about individuals making their own rules for individual games, individual gaming groups. That's generally Games Workshop's attitude. And he's Jervis has consistently asking players to experiment and make the game their own by working with it and working through it, trying to resolve problems, adding elements if you think they're lacking, and so on. And there's this attitude about what's official and whether or not there's official clarification or errata. And it's almost as if anything produced by the company is written by like the hand of God or something. And I fall into that myself. As a collector, it's difficult for me to take community projects too seriously. Um, you know, if I were to imagine someone writing a short story and they changed the whole, you know, story or came up with some intriguing plot line, it might be kind of cool, but I wouldn't accept it as canon, right? It's not Warhammer lore. But all it takes is Games Workshop to commission some random author. Doesn't even have to have written for the company before, and all of a sudden it's okay and it's perfectly fine and now it's acceptable. And it's a weird type of transition, and it's really almost something that Games Workshop has been trying to tone down over the years. But it's very difficult, and it's something that I have difficult times with as well. And when you think about a rule set, we've all had those heated arguments over the smallest interpretations or the challenges to particular measurement that just kind of go on without end. There's no great resolution. You're dealing with things that may have happened a turn ago, and in almost every instance, when you get into those type of arguments, they detract from the enjoyment of the game. right? When you get in those stupid, like little teeny details, I've had the game ruined. Sometimes you get to turn 3 and it's just like, ah, screw it. Like, I've had enough, and those are so dumb. I think almost everyone would admit those are like the worst things that can happen. Um, so it's not that I don't enjoy super comprehensive and detailed rules. I do, but I would far rather have a casual enjoyment and a casual, enjoyable play experience. And really, I mean, no rule is worth getting upset about or constantly slamming your perspective onto your opponent. I have my own views about what's going on with Age of Sigmar and interpreting the War Scrolls and things like that. But I just don't care at this point. I've gotten into a few lengthy, stupid conversations that just went on and on. Neither of us can win the argument, and I just don't care. Uh, you know, I'm perfectly okay accepting his perspective in one game or her perspective in another. If they like how I interpret it, great. It doesn't really affect the gameplay that much, so long as both of you are going to have fun. So the goal of the game is first and foremost to have fun. That's Games Workshop's like attitude. And there are many games directed at more serious audiences. From what I've heard from looking at other game systems, that they're more strict, more kind of uh, more geared towards players that want to be a bit more stern and less casual. But Games Workshop has always consistently advertised and promoted themselves towards the growing casual gaming community. And I can tell you that no rule set is free from interpretation. I've been in this hobby 18 years. I've played several editions of Fantasy, several editions of 40K, many other Games Workshop games. And I don't think this is purely a Games Workshop issue. I just think that players consistently interpret things in their favor, right? Whenever I play my wife, I'll on her turn, everything's good. When it comes to my turn, I'll just naturally remember things that happen to like work out in my favor, and she's kind of annoyed by that or whatnot. But I think that's just how people do. When they read a rule, they work it into their favor, and no matter how simplistic or basic a line of rule may be, you can interpret it drastically if you really try to get into it. And like I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's human nature. But the solution is not to have Games Workshop constantly clarify these with, every single little detail just goes on to like ad nauseum. I think solutions should be decided among friends and among individual gaming groups. And frankly, that's the way it's always been. And again, that's what Games Workshop encourages. And look, the most important rule in the rulebook has always been clearly stated: make it among yourselves, decide amongst yourselves, and if you can't, roll a dice. That has been like the standard, most important rule. I'll hammer that down. The most important rule has been that for as long as I've been playing. As far I haven't gone back and looked in my third edition 40K book and my fourth and fifth edition fantasy, but it's been there for a long time. And with regards to Age of Sigmar, every public commentary GW has made can be reflective of the company's desire to see more community involvement and community solutions. It's purposely made a fairly basic rule set to encourage just that. So the authorship of rules, if you look at the beginning of your Age of Sigmar books, it's not really they don't really say who wrote them. In the past, they used to, and the rules writers would get a whole bunch of flack because gamers are a pretty picky group, and so they don't do that anymore. But I would say, looking at the basic framework and the open nature of Age of Sigmar, in my mind, at least in part, that's all applicable to Jervis Johnson's design philosophy. And frankly, I completely endorse it. I'm increasingly a more casual gamer. I have no interest in getting into stupid arguments over rule sets. It doesn't interest me. I'd much rather have fun. But I would also point out, again, this is something Games Workshop's been doing for a very long time. Um, they've always put rules as a little bit less important in part of their company philosophy. If you look at even at the big, thick, honking rule books of the past, even the one that for 40K or Fantasy, the big red book, only about maybe a quarter to a third of that is truly rules, right? A huge portion of it is models and fluff and hobbying, right? How to paint, how to put together your model. That's what the company is about. Rules are a component of the company, or in the game. I don't think that they've ever made any notion that they're giving up on rule making or abandoning the game completely. They love the game, they love the rules, but let's not constantly try to have the attitude that that's the pinnacle of the company. Um, and the most disgruntled players are probably the most vocal, as they've, and Games Workshop, the chairman of the company alluded to that in the 2015 opening preamble, that that's not going to sway their overall strategy as a business. So what Games Workshop does do well is produce models. Almost everyone acknowledges that Games Workshop models are extremely high quality. Their pace of production is beyond their competition. It's very difficult to compete with weekly releases. Making models, therefore, is Games Workshop's strength. And it's not that the rules are poor, but rather that Games Workshop as a company is positioned in its worldwide network of stores and manufacturing capability, and simply has a far wider net. A lot of its competitions are crowdsourced, and you just can't produce the same amount, right? You need, in order to make those sprues work so well when you put them together, you need some high-tech computer software, and that takes a lot of money. And a lot of its competitors are pretty small. Games Workshop employs a lot of people, and it cannot promote itself on rules alone, but it never has really had that in mind. And because of the small nature of a lot of its competitors, I'm not saying that it will ever wipe them out or dominate the market ever again. I don't think that that's ever going to happen, but it doesn't need to. In GW's 2015 fiscal statement and press release, the first two primary elements of the company were, number one, the production of quality miniatures, and number two, the production of fantasy miniatures in their imaginary worlds. So their IP, their fluff, is so important to them. And a lot of hobbyists, like myself, read these statements, but they're not aimed at us, right? A press release, a company's statement about its money and its income and its finances, that's not aimed at the gamers. That's aimed at its investors. And when people ask themselves, why would GW focus on modeling? Well, model production and distribution is Games Workshop's primary edge over its competition. It's very hard to compete with companies that are generate their income through Kickstarter and things like that. But it's just Games Workshop is trying to succeed through the production of high quality models. And yeah, for experienced players, the rules can sell the models, but that's not as applicable for investors and new players, right? And that's what the financial reports are for. An investor in the company, you're not going to try to gain investors by handing them a big thick rule book and saying this is how we generate our income, and this is why you should invest in our, because we have this brilliant rule set. That's not going to work. You're going to show them flashy models. And the same with new players. A new player walks into a store. Again, you hand them a 200-page rule book and they're going to walk right back out. But if you show them, check out these sweet models on the shelves, awesome. That will get people in. So the way that models look is one of the primary reasons why they choose a game. And the models promote the rules. The rules are the glue that binds everything together cohesively, but ultimately what drives the company is the model production. They take up far more company resources in their design and manufacture and distribution and the amount of space in the store than any other component of the company. And that's the component, it's that hobby component that GW strongly encourages and promotes. The company's expenses, and therefore profit, is tied far more strongly to model production than rules development. But in the end, they're really interchangeable and they're really interconnected. And Games Workshop knows that. The models work with the rules, and the rules work with the models. Games Workshop has, from its infancy, from almost, from the very beginning, has always been a modeling and not a gaming company. It made models first and then made the game to promote the models. It didn't happen the other way. They didn't have a fantastic game and we're like, what are we going to do with this? We need, now we need some models. No, they made the models first, then they made the game. So in the early history of the company, they produced models for other games like D&D. And then they had the brilliant idea of making a platform from which they could use, or people could use their own collection as if it were a cohesive army, instead of just collecting a variety of miniatures from this crazy imaginary world. Now it has a cohesiveness to it, which is what the rules did. And they designed the game to support that concept. So from its very inception, the game was a platform upon which GW could sell models. And the same could be said of the art and the fluff. I think Games Workshop loves both. They really promote it. Again, the rules are a direct connection. They're very reflective of the models and the fluff, and it all forms one cohesive bundle. But the models are what really underpins it all, and it's where all their money is very made. Right? You can have the most brilliant rule set, but the rules themselves aren't making money directly. The models are, and that's why Games Workshop states that they're a modeling company. And I don't think we should take offense to that. So, thanks for watching if you have, and have a good one.